Hi, everyone. I think this is that hour of the day where, despite the multiple cups of coffee and the inspiration that we may be flagging a little bit, but you're in luck because there are four absolute dynamos who are disruptors in every sense of the word in their lives and their careers, and so it's really exciting that we get to hear from them. So I'll just go through and introduce them real quick. Sixto Cancel is the founder of Think of Us, a nonprofit dedicated to leveraging technology to improve the outcomes of foster youth aging out of the system. And then next to him is Lizette Burton, who's Director of National Advocacy at Boys Town. And to her right is Edwin Desamore, who's a behavioral specialist at the John B. Stetson Charter School in Philadelphia and a community advocate extraordinaire. And then finally we have Marlene Asayo, who is the executive director of the Disability Rights Center in Massachusetts. So I really encourage you to look at all of their bios because those are just kind of what they're doing now, or a little sample of what they're doing now. And I think one thing that you'll really benefit from is they've all had multiple perspectives and come from multiple angles at the system, which I think really enriches the discussion we're about to have. So we actually have a poll question, but before we do that, I just wanted to mention a recent experience I had a couple of weeks ago in Los Angeles that I feel like is really sort of illustrative of what we're talking about today, and also some of the themes for our entire day today. We, along with the National Center for Lesbian Rights, Equality California, the ACLU of California, and the LGBT Center in Los Angeles, are co-sponsors of a bill here in California, AB 2119, which actually requires folks in the foster care system in California to ensure that transgender youth are connected with qualified care providers and actually provided the medical care that's recommended for them. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, isn't the system already supposed to be doing that for them? Why do we need another law that says that? Well, stigma, prejudice, discrimination, bias, misunderstanding, ignorance, those are just a few of the reasons that we need this extra law. So about a year ago, a lawyer from the Children's Law Center in LA called our office to say, we have a trans client who is having some challenges getting health care, and can you talk me through some of this? So through that young person's lawyer, he got the care that he needed, but it took about 9 months. And I think most of you probably know how critical getting health care is for trans youth. So just a couple of weeks ago, we reached out, coordinated having this young man go up to Sacramento to testify in support of the bill. He did, he was amazing. The bill passed out of committee and is working through the process in the California legislature. So that's all the good news. A couple of weeks ago, I actually got to meet him in LA. I went to his group home, took him to Lambda's offices, he met folks, and in the process of LA traffic, we had time to talk. And it turns out he's been in this group home for 2 years because there's been no home for him. And he was placed on the boys' side, but because of bullying and mistreatment, he had to move back to the girls' side because he didn't feel safe. Also, he's been forbidden to go to the trans support group at Children's Hospital because that's seen as a reward for behavior. And he wasn't cleaning his room, and so has not been able to go as a reward to a group that's essential for his well-being. Right? And he also said that he hasn't been able to get glasses and can only use his $25 voucher for clothing once it's accumulated for 3 months, and his clothes don't fit him anymore since he began hormone therapy. So through his lawyers and raising awareness with the caseworkers that helped get him to Sacramento, we're addressing all those issues. But after I dropped him off at the group home, I just sat in my car and just stared into space for a little while, just thinking, here we are trying to get a system to understand the needs of trans youth, meet them, and he's not even getting glasses, right? And can't even find a home, much less be in a place that's really affirming and supportive for him. So thinking about our topic here today, what if we treated kids like kids, takes me to thinking about the basics. And I wanted to put up our first sort of poll question here. for all of us to think about, which is if you were a kid in the justice system, what could we do to put you as the center of what we're doing and recognize you as an individual? So if you want to post your thoughts to that, while those things accumulate, I want to turn to our panel, and we'll start with Marlena, with our big question of, well, what if we treated kids like kids? What would that look like?
So the first thing that came to mind as I was thinking about this yesterday is, how do we define what a child is or what a kid is? And it brought me back to my own childhood. I'm a Cuban immigrant, and so we were raised where kids are seen and not heard. You sit in a corner and you do as you're told. And so I don't think at that point in time, as I was growing up, I had a voice. I had a voice, but I didn't use that voice in my household because you knew better. And then flip that now to me being a parent and having kids, and my kids always telling me, but you don't understand. And let me explain to you how you don't understand. Having been a teacher, a special ed teacher to be exact, I often wonder, would things have been different when we held IEP meetings and we actually had the student, the child, sitting at the table discussing what they felt they needed in order to process the material that was being offered to them. Instead, you had individuals in the room that were just dictating what was best for the child and that child's IEP. You know, move forward to when I was a child welfare attorney and I represented the rights of a child as an attorney ad litem. Not the rights, but the child's wishes. And I went head to head with guardian ad litems because I'm here representing what this child wants. And so I'm the voice for the child, whereas the GAL is like, the child doesn't know what the child wants. I'm telling you what should happen. Or when I represented juveniles in court, and it's like, Marcel, you just don't get it. Like, they're putting me in here and bleepity, bleepity, like, and it was giving the child the opportunity to speak, acknowledging the child's presence in that room, and validating their feelings. And I think, to me, that is where we lack within each of the systems that I just spoke about, is that we fail to validate what kids are going through. I had the honor of being on the ground after the Baltimore riots. And why do I say it's an honor? Because I had the honor to go into the community and speak to the juveniles, the youth that were in pain, that were crying out to those of us at DOJ that were there speaking to them and explaining to us, do you know why we rioted? Because it's been over a year that we've been here asking for services, and you're not giving us any. We've been telling you we need after-school, activities. You ain't giving us that. So what happened? Y'all decided to shut down the system and let us out of school. Well, this is how it goes down. And this is what I'm hearing. And you've got people over here saying, lock them up. But no one's stopping to take a step back and say, listen to what is being said. They're hurting, they're in pain, and they're looking and they're crying for you to just acknowledge that and help them overcome it. So that's what I think about when I hear the words how do you treat a child that way, or how do you treat kids, is giving them the opportunity to be heard and validating their existence.
Well, when I think about how would it look like after we treat kids like kids, if we were all given a box to take home on our travels, and on that box, on top of that box is taped up and it says, handle with care, very fragile. How would that ride home be? Would you put the box in the trunk? Would you carefully put a seatbelt over it? Would you place it on your lap in the plane? And most of us on our way there to our destination, you're going to hear something. It's going to get a crack. It's probably going to jingle a little bit. Some of you are going to be like, it was already broke before I got it. I heard it shaking already. And the reason I'm thinking about that is our kids are fragile. And sometimes we forget that they're kids and they're fragile. And a lot of times people don't want the box. They don't want the kid because he's already he or she is already broke, to them. Nobody wants to put in the work. And I always think about that, I think it's the TD commercial with the little pig that falls down and the guy tapes it all up. But when you think about it, when we get to our destination, no matter how broken the vase or glass may be, who's willing to put in the work to tape it up, glue it up, put it together, put it on display and say, you're beautiful? Because many of our kids are broken. They're fragile, and they're going to break, but it's how we put it together. As advocates, as lawyers, when you're out there speaking to a judge, you have to get everybody to see this child as a child. We need to treat this child as a kid because they're fragile. Before I get into this, just a little background on me. I'm from North Philadelphia, a place called the Goodlands. I usually get a smirk when I say that. Folks who know about Philly. They know about the Badlands, but nobody knows about the Goodlands. And the reason I say that, when you think about it, I'm on a campaign to try to call it the Goodlands because when you tell young folks you're from the Badlands, what's that already puts in their mind? I have to rep this. There's many good people in these communities. You think about, you have a GPS in your driver. Can you imagine your GPS just tells you, you just now enter the Badlands? You want to do a U-turn, right? Some people got to keep going. Very good people, but they're labeled with that. Children are labeled with that already. You could take an Instagram picture and it actually pops up Badlands, literally. And they try to look up to that reputation. Well, from the Goodlands, born and raised, rough upbringing, exposed to a lot of things. At the age of 16, I was charged with first-degree murder. I was facing life and death penalty at that time, when you were allowed to get the death penalty at 16. Went to trial, was found guilty of third-degree murder. My sentence was 7 to 20. It was my first offense, 7 to 20. You think about that tail, some of the lawyers understand that tail, 7 to 20. It was meant for me to be staying in there. I ended up doing 8.5 years. I've been home 20 years now, 20 years. But this whole day today was very emotional for me to listen to everyone. I even thought about my lawyer. My lawyer, during trial, who understood I was still a kid. I remember he used to do little things like slip me some candy, crack a joke with me, pat me on my back. He didn't just treat me like a client. He made me feel comfortable. And I remember I was in a prison. It was an adult jail. We were on a juvenile block. And I remember being on the block. Now, on this block is all juveniles who are certified as an adult facing life in prison. Death penalty and life in prison, from the ages of 12 all the way up to 17. And I remember stepping out on the block, and I was going through this while I was sitting up there listening to everyone. They were watching cartoons. Did you hear me when I said that? They were facing life and death penalty, but they were watching cartoons on the prison block. That's how fragile this is.
So we're getting to the end of the day, and we've heard a lot of personal stories that people have shared, and I just want to say that's tough to share and we're sitting on a stage and sharing your personal experiences. So thank you, thank you everybody who's done that. I don't know anybody who's in this work who doesn't have some kind of personal connection to it, and so it's when people bring that to the table, I think it's meaningful and it matters. So I am, on your original schedule, it said Dr. Kavanaugh. I am clearly not Dr. Kavanaugh. I am not a forensic psychologist. I don't even play one on TV. I have a wealth of other experiences, a lot of which starts in direct care. So I grew up working directly with children and families and communities in a variety of settings. I was a community organizer at one point around school readiness, early intervention in schools. I ran a program called Youth as Resources, where it was young people who had touched the court system, but instead of setting them up with probation or something like that, this was in Detroit, they got to solve a problem in their community, and that's how it was restorative justice, right? We didn't call it that back then, it was, but that's what it was. And so all of that experience, I think, colors my priorities, the urgency I feel around certain things, And one of them is, and I was really excited to be invited to the panel, and I appreciate that today, because one of those things I'm passionate about is treating kids like kids. So real quick, you guys saw Boys Town up there. You saw it one other time today, and that was in the reference to orphan trains. And back in the day, so yes, I work for a really old organization. We were founded in 1917 by a Catholic priest, although we're not a Catholic organization. But he was kind of radical for his time, right? He tried to open up in Omaha. He'd been working with men who were having difficulties and were homeless, and he realized, when a young person came to him and said, Father, where were you when I was young? He realized he needed to go farther upstream and work with young people. And he was very intentionally not involved with the Catholic Church, because at the time, the Catholic Church had opened workhouses for children, right? Definitely not treating children like children, treating them as manual labor and essentially child slaves. And he said, I'm not going to do that, so I'm not going to be beholden to the Catholic Church. I'm not going to proselytize. We're not going to change kids' religions. And we're going to take kids of all races, creeds, and colors. Now, this was in 1917 in Omaha, Nebraska. They kicked him out of Omaha and said, you're not going to do that here. And he got some land and started Boys Town outside of that. We do treat boys and girls. I feel like I have to give all these caveats. And we also, so some people I think know our name, but don't know that 95% of the young people and families we work with, over 35,000 last year, were in their own homes and in their own communities. We've got a national hotline that takes about 150,000 calls each year. We run a website, I'm talking about technology, called Your Life, Your Voice, where young people can chat, text, and also call to get help in times of crisis. It's amazing. Sometimes talking to somebody that you don't know, you're able to get the help that you need, and we can connect to resources. We intervened in over 500 active suicides just last year. And got resources to people who needed it. So we're doing a lot of different things, including community engagement work. Anybody want to talk to me about it afterwards, you can. And I would love to have that conversation. But at the heart of all that is kids are kids. And so one of the things that my husband and I did is we had a home first for girls who were referred to us through the child welfare system, and then boys referred through the juvenile justice system. And we insisted, we were fortunately in a position to be able to do this, but we insisted that young men coming to us, always from incarceration, at first they would try to bring them to us off a van in shackles, still in kind of, jumpsuit, and we were like, yeah, that's not acceptable. We're not gonna start a relationship with these young people in that way as we try to get them back to their homes and in their communities. We're a community-based setting, so young people who would come to us are going to school and community, they're running track, they're playing football, their families are coming over to our home. Our biological children were involved, so it's kind of like foster parenting or co-parenting on steroids. Only that was our full-time job, and we were trained and had a model we could work within and had lots of support. But treating kids like kids, we insisted, no, we're gonna go to where they are first. We're gonna let them meet us so that they have some choice and some agency in this new place they're about to go to. We're gonna show them pictures of our bio kids and our dog and our fish in the house. We're gonna let them ask questions. That wasn't an opportunity to interview them about anything. It was really an opportunity just to get to know them a bit, so that the first time that they did come to our home and know that that was a place that they were going to be and where we were going to partner with their families, it was a place where maybe they were a little bit excited to be because we had set some groundwork in place. So relationships are key. I would say in terms of treating kids like kids, I think that also means moving beyond the case file. So especially all the lawyers in the room, you got to read the file, otherwise you can't zealously advocate for your client. After I did direct care, I went to law school because I was fired up about system silos, and then now I do policy and advocacy work. But moving beyond the case file. So sometimes when we read a file, we feel like we have all the information and we don't necessarily ask questions that we would otherwise ask from the child's perspective. And so I think part of treating kids like kids is making sure that we're asking those questions and not in a checklist kind of let me fill out this box so that I get this required information so that I can comply with whatever the requirements are. But it really is about having a conversation and getting it information naturally. And sometimes that information comes out over multiple conversations. But being inquisitive and asking questions beyond just what are your charges or what happened to you in this situation, but having a real conversation. What do you like? Who's your favorite team? Cracking jokes, doing those kinds of things that reinforce that you're a human being having a conversation with another human being. as you try to get at, meaningful information that's going to help you help that individual. I think it also means, I got 2 more things. I think it means moving beyond creating good consumers or good clients of the services or the supports that we all have to offer. So, and what do I mean by that? I think we sometimes help kids become really good at knowing how court works or how to interact with their case planning session, and they learn the terminology and they know what to do. But I think sometimes we forget, it's easy because we've all got stuff to do and a role to play, forget what the big picture of all of that is. And it's not about creating good clients or good consumers. It really is about helping that young person and that family through whatever that challenging circumstance may be, and helping them come out stronger on the other side. And so remembering that. And the last thing I would just say is joy experiences, we call it, right? One of the places where I worked, and I was lucky to work there, we got to do canoe trips. We do 30-day canoe trips and backpack trips. And yeah, no, it was pretty crazy. But yeah. But it was amazing. And a part of our structure for the day, every day included fun. Fun was a mandatory part of the day. No matter how tough the day was going, no matter what had happened, it wasn't fun for some of the kids. It wasn't just fun for kids who were doing well or being good. Fun was a mandatory part of the day. And I've taken that into every role that I've been a part of. What kind of joy experiences are you taking? What kind of jokes are you cracking? What kind of, going out to throw a ball, having that conversation that we talked about to get more information through those kinds of interactions instead of sitting across a desk. Just being intentional about joy experiences and fun, because kids still need to play and have fun. And many of our young people, especially by the time they're teens, they've been involved in systems for a while. Most of the interactions that they're having with folks like us in this room don't revolve around anything joyful or fun, but we can help to create moments like that for young people.
Thank you. All righty. Hello, everyone. Let's wake up just a little tiny bit. When I think about this question, and as we prepared, I have to say, there was a lot of discussion on our calls, and they were pretty good, because we went down a lot of different routes, because one was this the topic that we should be talking about? Because my initial inclination was, how is this different than what we've been saying for decades beforehand? Is this a new concept, right? And so we went through that idea, the idea of, what if we treat young people in the courts and foster care system as our own? And I raised the hand and said, I don't want to be treated like you treat your kids. Let me be clear. That might be problematic. But to answer this specific question, there's 2 things that I want to address. And the first one is, when I think about treating kids like kids, first of all, I think we're looping in everybody into the kids category. And that's just not okay. Because what kids need, what preteens need, what adolescents need, emerging adults and young adults are completely different. And when we say just kids, it starts to put that same framework of, okay, how do we treat a whole group of people the same way? And so I think we run the risk of, again, maltreatment. I'll go as far as saying that, but I'm not supposed to say that in a room full of people who are really academic, okay? But I'll say it for some trouble. We can argue later. But the point is that what's developmentally appropriate, right, for each of these different age groups, we have to start asking ourselves, how do we treat kids as kids? How do we treat teenagers as teenagers? How do we treat young adults as young adults, right? And that looks different. And then, Edwin, with all due respect and to the folks who were nodding, I do not believe that any child is broken, and I do not believe that our children and young people are fragile. And let me explain. I believe that children and young people, myself, all of us, we are a representation of the trauma that we have experienced and then the opportunity to heal or not. So there should be no confusion. When something's broken, it's because some accident has happened and it's been shattered or something went wrong in the sense of there was an incident. But this is a formula that we know. When there is extreme trauma as you are developing, then the result is without the ability to heal, those promotive and protective factors, then the result is going to be very clear. So when I think about myself, I entered foster care at 11 months, was adopted at the age of 9 by a very racist and abusive woman. A woman who, told me straight to my face, black people need to go to public school. All the white kids in the house got to go to, a private school. They got season passes. I was cleaning. I was in the corner, locked in the attic, locked in the basement. But at 13, couch surfing, place to place. Had a lot of very difficult experience on the streets. But the difference is between me and my siblings is that when I turned 15, I was able to participate in programs like Jim Casey Opportunity Initiative, where I learned money management. And these different programs, the different advocacy groups that I started to join, became the promotive and protective factors that started to give me new experiences that help rewire that brain, right? And so then I'm at where I'm at today. But when I look at my younger brother, and at the age of 9, when he was placed into a lockdown residential that did not do fun, that did not turn around and figure out what was his developmental needs, right? And moved him from place to place to place to place till he was 18, then put him in a low-level group home that's supposed, where, I don't know why they thought he was gonna follow curfew. The kid's been, in a lockdown facility since 9 to 18, and then we wonder why the results. So to me, I push this notion that there is a broken child or that children are fragile. No, during our childhood and adolescence, we are taking in these experiences, and then the output is the result of the trauma or the great developmental opportunities we have. And I think that what has happened is that we have started to use the words way before all of us in the room, before us, all of us, and before our parents probably, that we use the word broken child and we use words like that because it's an easy way to actually say, it's an escape. It is the way to be like, oh, well, there's not much we can do there, right? And so to me, I think we have to start, if we want to get radical, we have to start taking responsibility that the reason why we see the behaviors and we see what we see within young people is directly because of what they are experiencing and what's being wired and not being healed.
I agree. And the only thing I want to add is I completely agree with the differentiation that you said in terms of what child versus adolescent versus teen versus young adult. And I would say, though, it's not just chronological, right? It's developmental. And so you've got to look at, what's not even just age appropriate, but developmentally appropriate for that young person that's in front of you. Just because they're 13 doesn't mean that they line up with all those milestones that you would expect of somebody who chronologically is 13. Just one more point.
So I just want to take a minute and kind of acknowledge some of the responses to our polls in the wake of our panelists' comments. And just note one, that the sort of slow down and get to know me, which is what, so many people when they say like, what do I need? I need time with you. Like I need time for you to understand me and get to know me. And then the one above it, recognize the urgency of my circumstances, that we have to do both. Get to know and act, because the situation is critical, around everything. And so with that, we're going to segue into our next question. There we go. Okay, so this is kind of shifting. We talked a little bit before we started about, we've had a lot of really important discussions, and we're in an action-oriented section of all right, this is awesome, but what are we going to do differently when we leave here? What are the steps that we're going to take? So we have this question for you. So what do you do so you see the child as a whole person and not another case? What are some things you've done personally to make sure that that kid is treated like a kid and at the center of the case? So if you want to submit those. And I think I want to hear from our panel, maybe Sixto, if you want to talk a little bit about all the work that you've been doing to assist kids who are aging out of foster care.
Absolutely. So one of the things that, I really love policy and practice. And then one of the things I realized early on was that takes forever. A lot of work. When we look at Connecticut, the youth board and many of the youth boards around the state, when I was in high school, we organized and did all this work to pass the siblings bill, the right to see our siblings, and that took 6 years. And so to me, I quickly realized that if we are going to do something, we have to think differently about how do you influence policy and practice. And so that's when I started to do a lot of different research. And what it boiled down to, what I realized, I was like, I wanted this research question. If I wanted to change 1,000 social workers' behavior in one day who were in different systems, how would I do it? And then when I started to actually talk to people about this, they were like, you're crazy. That's not how things work. This is what bureaucracy is, blah, 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 blah. And what I realized is that, yeah, I'm a little crazy. And so I found something, though, and it was technology. The case management systems that people are using actually influence behavior so much. It pushes a compliance-based behavior. If you ask a question in the case management system, you have to input something. So if I say, hey, what is under the child's bed? I can have 1,000 social workers overnight looking under children's bed because that is what they have to put into the system. And so we see how social workers don't actually get the credit for going the extra mile because some of that doesn't go into the case management system, so therefore it disincentivizes that behavior. And then we see the behaviors that actually do get incentivized. Or the copy and pasting that you do pretending that you've done that for every child because you have a big caseload. So one of the things that we've been focused on is how do we start to take all of the learnings from the field. So we have these conversations about love, right? We have these conversations about connection and all of this. And the question becomes, how does it become part of practice? And what we realize, if you start to actually bring it into the design of the tools that paid professionals are using, that you can actually start to influence paid professionals to go ahead and implement the best practices in the earliest learning lessons we have. And so I know a lot of people are thinking that's crazy. So I kind of want to show a real example. I started to tweet, but then someone tweeted ahead of me. Can I do this again? Let me see. Okay, there we go. So one of the things we did is we built a web and mobile application. And we had this notion when the legislation passed and said, young people can invite two adults to their case planning, right? And then we said, it's best practice for young people to lead. Nobody tweet until I get past this picture. For the record. So then we were like, hey, what if young people are the ones to be, at the center of their case planning by identifying goals, by inviting people to their goals and so forth, right? And so we started to look at the literature between child welfare, what's healthy, how the adolescent brain is wired, what are the actual skills we're supposed to be learning, and then executive coaching, right? What is the science or the literature, let me be clear, the literature behind executive coaching, Anthony Grant, and this is what we came up with. What if young people logged onto their phone, actually went ahead, pressed that little button right there on the first screen, started to create a goal, named a goal, selected what type of a domain it was, gave their idea of when the target date should be, because we realized that nobody follows due dates. It's a thing that we always miss, right? I'm bringing up the next one here. And then, how does it that we might go ahead and start adding action steps to that? So the young person's adding in what they believe to be true is the actual next steps to it. And then most importantly, what do we know? What does the evidence show us? That human beings, human connection, is the strongest preventive measure to reduce kind of, there I go, trying to do two things at the same time. I'll get to that in a second. So being able to add unpaid people and the paid folks in your life. So being able to actually alert your social worker of the goal and the next steps that you believe to be true, but then to be able to work with your social worker, the unpaid people in your life, to actually go ahead and figure out what that plan is. And in that creation of that plan, the going back and forth that happens in person and digitally, you really start to be able to build that relationship. But then we said we needed to take it a step further, because what we heard from Jennifer Rodriguez, the importance of those small moments of trust and love, right? So what does it mean when you get, on our platform, the young person says, my next step is to get a resume, to get a job, I need to get a resume. Well, our AI system, our software, is actually nudging the supportive adults and saying, here's a template to a resume, here's some talking points, here's the video content on how to do that, now reach out to the young person. Because that interaction right there is what's meaningful. And that's what starts to build real permanency. When I have a problem and someone shows up and they're supportive with an actual answer, that's a little different than what I experience in the system sometimes, And so to be able to create these small moments of trust and support is so important. And where technology can be really useful is in facilitating that connection. I think what happened in our field is that we get so excited about artificial intelligence, about big data, and we start to try to predict child abuse and predict this and predict that, when I'm like, wait, there are things that we know. We know that if we create a lot of moments of interaction between a young person and a supportive adult that's not paid, that they start to build a relationship and it starts to act like a family network to that young person. And where can that lead? So how about we start using, like we are, advanced analytics and artificial intelligence just to figure out when we should be sending the right information to the young person, to the supportive adult, and then asking, hey, how about you two get together and do something, you know? And let that be the formula for building a relationship. And so what we're seeing now is that we're getting tons of data that, one, we don't even know what it means, but two, on the other end, what we do know, what we do see, out of the data that we do know what it means, is that we actually start to see people actually forming communities, right? And I think that is the way that we start to take all the learnings from this field, right, around connection, around the disparity gaps, and start to translate it into design of products that actually reinforce it. Because here, the way it starts is with the young person. And we've been talking about that for a long time. We talk about the gaps between genders. We talk about the gaps between race. We can see that it takes twice as long for an African-American male who's 17 and a half to get his educational request filled than it does his peers. So we can start to see, and most importantly, when we're talking, we are not talking from the from literature or from the idea of a new model that's not being followed. We are talking based on the digital behaviors of paid professionals, young people, and unpaid people in their network. And that is the facts. So how might we start to use this digital behavior, this new form of data that we're not used to using in child welfare? At least that's my claim.
I wondered if Lizette and then Edwin would share a couple really concrete examples when we were preparing for the panel. I think one is actually getting feedback from youth who are being served by Boys Town. Do you want to talk about that?
I'm gonna see if, this works. So just real quick, building off of I don't know, if you haven't looked at Think of Us and you haven't seen the app that he's created, please do look at it. One of the things, just real quick, I think there's been a shift in the field, right? So it used to be if you worked with a young person or family, after your time with them was done, that was it. You said goodbye, it was good luck, and then there was it was considered unprofessional to continue to interact with that family or that young person, right? There's been a big shift with that, and one of the things I love in particular about this app is it allows the young person to self-select, hey, that lawyer I had 3 years ago was a really meaningful person in my life who continues to send me birthday cards like somebody wrote, or is a support. I want to invite them to be a part of my ongoing social network. And by the way, having a plan, particularly for young people in the child welfare system, of they just need one trusted adult or maybe just two trusted adults. For those of us who don't touch any system at all, ever, anywhere we get to, it's because we have a whole big network of people who are engaged with us at different times, who can help us in different ways or support us in different ways or meet different needs. And so that's just something else I love about this. Young people get to select, and then adults have permission, or know that they're being asked to engage intentionally. And that's powerful too, right? Instead of just, I don't know if this young person wants to hear from me or I don't want to bother them or whatever, they're getting prompted and it's an intentional interaction on both sides, which I love. Going back to the question of, what do you do so you see a child as a whole person and not just another case? I think you ask them how they're doing and how effective whatever the intervention is, whether it's your lawyering or whether it's a service or a support they're getting, how's it working for them? How do they like the people that are providing those interactions to them? We institutionalize that at Boys Town. It's consumer reports where young people are asked anonymously, what do they think about the people who are directly caring for them? And so again, we're not a shift work model, so they're living with a couple, and again, if they have biological kids or all that's a part of the experience, but we're asking them directly and anonymously to give their feedback. And that feedback is meaningful. It impacts, we certify our employees, so if that feedback is negative, it can prevent that staff member from being certified, which prevents promotion or raises or anything else. And can lead to additional supervision or consultation so that we improve what that staff member is doing. And also, if things are really good, sometimes we've had young people share things that maybe they wouldn't ever tell a staff member working with them directly, hey, this was really meaningful to me, or this was really impactful. But we get to get that kind of insight too. So some of it is just asking young people what's working for them, what's not working for them, who's working for them in terms of those relationships and who's not, and then giving them some agency to make decisions and to impact how those things affect their lives.
And Edwin, you were telling me you have kind of a new thing in your office now.
Yes, I'm a dean at a middle school, Stetson, or just when I was a kid, I got kicked out by that school by the dean, and now I'm the dean at the school. That's pretty interesting. I originally started off in that school doing some programs. I used to do something called the Mimic program. I used to go to different schools, provide prevention, reach out to the young folks. I would literally go into a school and say, give me your worst. And I don't really mean it that way, but that's the way they were able to identify them. And once they gave me about 20 of them, they came out to be the best. It was just about pulling out what was strong about them. And being on that journey, and one thing I just want to say that stood out before I get to the, he was asking me about, in Philadelphia, I don't know about anywhere else. I know in Philadelphia, it's maybe over $270 million worth of nonprofits. It's like these Home Depot nonprofits are opening up. And the work is not, I'm just trying to really, I'm out on the field voluntarily a lot. And usually I get a call, I got this kid, can you talk to him? And then when I find out, who's servicing you? And they have all these advocates and caseworkers. And then I find out, when was the last time they came out to see you? Well, they gave us a call. So I start fishing around, and I head into these organizations, and I'm like, do you have such and such on your caseload? And this really burns me up. And they're like, what's their name again? Oh, wow. Then you open up. Oh, yeah, I've been to their house at this time and that time. Now you did all these home visits. Oh, they never saw it. They don't even know what you look like. But you wrote all this up, so I don't know how people are holding them accountable. I'm holding them accountable. So they know when I call, they better have it right. We even had one case where a young man got killed, and the street advocate, 2 weeks later, I said, do you have such on your caseload? He said, yeah. I said, when did you see him? He said, last week. He's been dead 2 weeks. Now, some of the struggles that we do have. But one thing I want to say is a theme that I've been really hearing is about a relationship, being in constant contact. What was effective? People said, what was effective about your, I said, we all have the same curriculums. We just changed it around, self-esteem, how you feel. And, we changed the names, but it's really the relationship. Young folks come back to where they feel comfortable at and who they know. A lot of nonprofits come up, once they run out of funding, bye, we don't talk to you anymore. And the kids know that. They know when someone's real, they know when someone's fake. And they know about all the surveys and what kind of gift card you're gonna give me to do the survey for you. If I show up, I get a gift card.
I still show up.
You still show up. Yeah. So that's something that's real. But I had the opportunity. I started in Stetson as doing programs. Then they asked me to come on as a dean. I said, wow, I'm always the advocate, but me as a disciplinarian, pretty interesting. So coming on in, I just wanted to do things different. Just find different ways. Two things that I just find funny. My kids try to figure me out. Sometimes they might tell their mom, like, my dean's a thug. Like, he has tattoos and everything. But what I was able to do is, like, I didn't really believe, I really still don't believe in suspending anybody. So I came up with something weird. One of my coworkers did, and I quickly used it. Called it a 0-day suspension. The only time I want to use that is if I can't get in contact with the parent. So they get a suspension slip thinking they have to come in and reinstate them, but they were never really reinstated. They come in confused. I'm like, but I got your attention now. Just being involved, I'm gonna hold you accountable. You're gonna come on in, we're gonna do some old school stuff. I want you to write like 50 times what you did wrong. And then we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna process that. But you're gonna be here. We're gonna clean these lockers. We're going to clean the floors, but we're going to hold you accountable. But at the same time, we're going to have conversations. And at the same time, if you don't show up, I'm going to go knocking on your door. I haven't seen you for a while. But what kind of dean are you? Because the deans are supposed to just give out the suspensions, the detentions, but we're going to get to know each other. Then I'm going to provide support when I know there's something going on in the family, something's wrong. So let's get you to the right place and get you to some after-school programs. Well, one of the things I just started not so long ago, it was pretty cool. I had a gentleman who's one of the hottest barbers in North Philadelphia in the Goodlands, and he asked, how can he give back? And we thought about it. So we came up with a point system where, as an incentive, if you behave a certain amount, you get a certain amount of points. If you, your academics, if you try to get another certain amount of points, it's a whole point system. And you might get a buzz cut for a certain amount of points. You might get the whole shape up for the, you get the designs for, for everything else. I have a barbershop in my office. So we did a GoFundMe page. Someone donated a chair. We got the mirror. We have the cape. We have the barber that comes in on Fridays. The kids got their payment. Their payment is their ticket. They earned it. There's nothing for free in life. They earned that haircut.
Edwin, I'm coming back to school.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't get to do it all.
And this is something that we just started about 2 months ago. I wish I really started this in September, but it's really shown something different. Because on purpose, me and the barber, we were planning it out. We want to pick a topic we want to talk about. And it becomes that barbershop atmosphere in my office.
There you go.
And we're having conversations about life. And you know how hard it is to keep a kid for detention, right? They make all types of excuses. They try to cut out. They don't want to leave. We're in a barbershop. We're to 6 o'clock. They're about to close the building. They do not want to leave. And I just want to mention one young man. We were talking one time. He was in the office with me. His name is Charles. I just made up his name. I don't want to give his real name. But this young man is in foster care. See, I didn't know that. Charles been on my floor. He's been a problem. He's been a problem on my floor, and I've been trying to figure him out. A lot of times, I don't get all the information on a lot of our kids. Charles cannot socialize the way he in class. We got classrooms full of 32 kids, 29 kids, 32 kids, and the teachers are frustrated. Do something with them. I don't want them in my class. And I'm trying to figure out Charles because I don't want to send him to different parts of the school because I know what could happen to him. Find out he's in foster care. That's already traumatizing. Being separated from your family. And now, just recently, he was separated from his siblings. Now they're all split up. So now he's coming to school with this, like many other students. But now he's struggling also with identity, who he is. So now on top of being separated from his family and not getting along with his peers, he's getting called gay and every other name you can imagine. But one day I had him in the office with me while we were setting up the barbershop, and he was like, I could draw. Can I hook up some barber signs? I was like, you know what, Charles? Hook it up. And he started, he had an imagination better than us. And he started putting it together, and I started to notice he was organizing. I said, you think you can help me out with this barbershop? He was like, sure, I could do that. He started lining people up, getting the list, taking care of this kid was organized. And he was meeting and greeting people. Charles, who could not get along with people, was meeting and greeting people coming into the door, sitting down, being involved with the conversations. Had his foster mom call me up. What is going on? Why is he coming home so late? But he's coming home happy, though. He's not coming home angry. He's not in trouble. And he's calling her up saying, can I stay late? But he's involved, and we found something there. And he's coming back. And I said, look, if you keep behaving. He goes, I'm going to behave. He says, I have to behave because I want to be involved. So we found something. It's always about thinking outside the box. So I know it sounds weird. In a dean's office, there's a barbershop when you walk in, and we have an actual barbershop that works.
I also one of the things I wish people, after I moved to New York, that I wish people had told me that there are all these jobs that you can have that only exist in New York, and working the door and working the list is one of them that you can have. So you can be on a really lucrative career track with that one. Also, I think Edwin's conversation is a nice situation, is a nice segue into an important piece of treating kids like kids, which is actually acknowledging and knowing about all aspects of their identity. And I think it's a good conversation in the wake of our important lunchtime conversation with James and Bernadine. And I wanted Marlena to share, if she will, a little bit about some of her incredibly difficult work in South Carolina around the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act, and then we have another poll question for you.
I don't know if you all are familiar with the fact that South Carolina was under a corrective action plan for violating the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act. And I was actually hired in 2008 to be the training attorney for the state on MIPA. And so I was curious as to why. What would have prompted HHS to come down, the Office of Civil Rights from DC, and tell them, y'all are going to enter into a corrective action plan? So it turns out that it was multiple violations. One of the violations was actually a young man, Hispanic male, who was placed in a home of an African-American couple. And all judicial reviews were glowing judicial reviews for, I think it was 3 or 4 years. The facts are a little fuzzy right now. But nonetheless, TPR happens. And so now the child's up for adoption. And the foster family puts in an application to become adoptive parents so that the child can continue to remain in that placement. And all of a sudden, the caseworker decides, this isn't working for us. And we're not going to have you, pretty much have this child in your home. And they pretty much used ethnicity as a proxy for inappropriate application of race, and decided that the child should be placed in a different home where the child kind of looked like the potential adoptive parents. So they sued, and ultimately they won, and they were able to get the child back into their home. So then I was like, well, is that it? I mean, does it only take one case? So lo and behold, I come to find out that, and mind you, I was hired in 2008. And they had gone back 15 years from 2008. So it didn't happen in the 60s. They were going through court files, or really the caseworker files. And in some of the files, they actually found swatches of material, different skin tones. And why were those in there? Because when they went into a potential foster home, they made sure that they had already matched the child's skin tone using the swatch. And then they would match the prospective family's skin tone. Because South Carolina. Because that made, they were a little ashy. No, it made sense, right? To them, it just made sense. And so another case, a Cuban family out in Greenville, South Carolina, applied. First of all, what's a Cuban doing in Greenville is beyond me. But they applied to become foster parents. And they were denied, not because there was anything wrong with the home, but because we don't have any Latinos up here who need placement. So it doesn't matter that we have kids that require a loving, stable household. It's just that you're Hispanic and we don't have anybody to place you with. Mm-hmm. So when we think about Hispanic, we're all different. You're from Puerto Rico, my Caribbean cousin here. I'm from Cuba. I eat, arroz con frijoles negros. Somebody else eats gandules, right? Danzón in my house. You might have had merengue. Dominican Republic, you got the salsa. We're all different. Yes, we speak a dialect of Hispanic. That doesn't mean that all of our kids are going to be the same. And so we need to stop putting labels on kids, right? But also understanding that all of us bring a cultural piece to the table, every single one of us. And what I have found in all the jobs that I have held is that cultural competency and the cultural sensitivity piece is missing. And we all need to work to ensure that that's part of our daily work. I can't walk into a community and having done mediation and reconciliation in communities, I just can't walk into a community and say, by the way, I get you, and I understand what you need, and here are the services that I can offer. Because guess what? If I don't look like the person I'm speaking to, chances are they're not going to pay attention to me. The one thing that I love about this panel, and I'm going to segue for a second, is that we're all people of color. I just moved to Massachusetts to run the Disability Law Center, and the one thing that I can say is within my second week on the job, big headline in the Boston Globe, Latinos don't have really a place at the table when it comes to executive positions or high-level positions in the state of Massachusetts. What the heck is this? Well, here I am, right? I'm a loudmouth Latina who was raised in Manhattan, and I'm going to be heard in a very nice way. And so I start having conversations, and what I'm finding is that my agency, which does fabulous work, has never done direct outreach to communities of color. So we offer all this work, but if folks in the communities of color are unaware of the great things that we do, then how are we going to be able to service them? So we have to be purposeful about the work that we do with each individual child and understand what that child's cultural background is being brought to the table, their ethnicity and the different flavors that come with it, and also understand that the communities that they grew up in affects the way that they approach the problems and also affects the way that they react to situations. And so that's a little piece of the RCNO work that I've done, and I'll leave it to you.
When Marlena was telling me about her work in South Carolina, I think it just really struck me hearing James and Bernadine talk about their experience in Alabama of like, that this is in the now. Like, you had the history, but all of this is happening right now, and I think like some of it too we don't even know because we're not asking about it. And so this is their series of questions of to respond. So the first one, and then we'll turn back to you. Do you ask your clients how they self-identify in terms of race and ethnicity? So if everybody will fill out that one, then we have a few more. But go ahead, Marlene, you wanted to.
Along those lines, so it's a weekday afternoon. I left work early to take my child for a physical, and my phone rings. And it's someone from my office, and they're like, "Where are you at?" I'm like, "At the doctor's office. What's the deal?" And they're like, "Oh, we just saw on the news that two Hispanic females got into an argument on the steps of the Capitol, and we were wondering if one of them was you." First of all, is there only two of us in the entire state? And second of all, why does it have to be me, right? But like, this is their perception is that we're so unique. Or you get the, like my little girl, when long hair, curly, she's so exotic looking. What do you mean by that, right? And so we have to also be aware of our own implicit bias that we're bringing to the table. And when you're asking about the self-identity in terms of race and ethnicity, also be careful how you couch that, because it can be offensive. So.
Okay, so let's go back to that one. So 43% said yes, right? So less than half, right? So do you ask your clients, youth you work with, about whether they identify as part of a faith community?
I know.
Okay. So we'll let people do the poll, and then we'll go to the next one, then we'll turn back in a second. All right, so only about 33%. All right, let's ask these next one. How about asking kids about their sexual orientation? All right, about 36%. Gender identity?
It's okay to answer these. You're skewing the data, technically.
All right, I think we're pretty consistent. Only about 40% of us even asking, right, about these different aspects that are, pretty crucial, like to who we are, and also pretty critical to our experiences in care, right? I mean, we're hearing about just blatant racism in the system, in addition to all the other isms. We know that LGBT youth have off the charts negative outcomes compared to their non-LGBT peers. And we also know that we have this sort of dual history of amazing faith-based providers operating in our system. At the same time, we have an awful legacy of faith-based providers wholesale removing kids from their homes and placing them in orphanages so they're saved, right? And, absolutely destroying, communities, Native American, Alaska Native communities, and, looking at the lost children of Wilder. I'm sure many of you have read of, blatant racism in the faith-based provider community. And now we have laws, Kansas and Oklahoma may today be states that pass these child welfare religious refusal laws that completely flip our system to prioritize the religious beliefs of the provider above the needs of the children. No balancing test, nothing. Like those providers' views trump, right? Which is something to think about. I mean, primarily, right, to be able, these providers to turn away same-sex couples, right? But also just in South Carolina, not to pick on poor South Carolina, but just a few weeks ago, a different sex Jewish couple went to a provider in their area and were turned away, right? A complaint was filed, and South Carolina's governor's response was to issue an executive order that ensured that faith-based providers receiving government funding could in fact turn away and refuse to serve whomever they wanted to. So, I think our point in having these poll questions was really to sort of get at, like, if we're not having a conversation about our clients and asking them how they identify in these self-regard, as they self-identify, and asking questions about their experience in care, how in the world are we treating them like as who they are and getting at their experiences in care?
I usually have groups outside of what I do as a dean in the community, and I have something called a Dropbox. So a lot of times when we have open discussions, sometimes a young person doesn't want to raise his hand because he's too embarrassed or doesn't want his peers to know that he's asking this question. So you get to put any question in that box. And they enjoy this because I also do something where when I look at the question, because I don't know everything, and they love to see that we all don't know everything. We're all in the same boat, but they love that I grab my phone. It's almost like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And I just call anyone I know randomly to read that question out. I read that question, can you give your opinion or answer that? And they're all into it. They're all to hear from different perspectives. One time, during a time we had about 8 youth in the room, and when I pulled out the slip, it was saying, Mr. Desmore, what if you're gay, your friend was gay, and he opened up to you and said that he's gay? And all the kids in there, not all of them, but most of them was like, who is it? Who's in here? Let me find out one of y'all. It was just real, but then they were looking at me to see what I say. So I don't know how much time I got long left, but I'm still kind of like cool to the kids. I'm getting older, so I don't know how long that lasts, So whatever I say can happen. So I'm like, well, if he's my friend, I'm still going to hug him. I'm still going to shake his hand. He's still my family. So later on that day when I was walking out, it was the toughest kid out the bunch. Say, hey, Mr. Desmond was looking out with that. That was me. I was like, man, I didn't know. But we were able to open up that conversation, but now we were able to sit down and him express himself in a safe environment. Now they're hanging out. They're all hanging out, going to the movies together. They went to see the Avengers. He still has his friends. But being able to be that safe space, a safe place for them, and because they're very keen on watching your body language, how you react to everything, what you do, what you say. It's just, they're reading us, believe it or not. They're whether we speak it or not, they're reading everything we do.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is missing from the conversation, though, becomes how do we actually get to implement this in our work? You see, when I was in care, I always used to be like, the social workers ain't doing enough. I even got the judges mad. I always was going after the paid professionals. And then I start working in the field, and I'm like, Lord Jesus, I'm going to have some bad karma come hit me. Because now I get it from the other side. When I think about the enormous work that needs to be done to be able to have this FaceTime, not everyone's set up for it because the caseload numbers are high, the case notes are too much. And when I think about how do we get practical with these things, I honestly believe that there's this big barrier, and it is administrative, bureaucratic things that need to get done. And we have to figure out how to tinker on those things. For us, our proof of concept will be when a young person's doing stuff on our application and our software and a worker's responding, we're auto-writing case notes, right? On the back end, the software is capturing that action, writing it up, emailing it to the worker because the worker's not going to log into something new. We figured that out. And then they can copy and paste and edit it as needed so that then they can put it into their case notes, right? And then you get your efforts, demonstration of efforts and all that other stuff. But what we realize is that if we don't figure out how to actually make sure that we're capturing what we're doing for our clients, our case notes, all of the administrative things we need to do, but in a way that we can reduce the amount of time we're spending on it, then I find it so difficult to get to the very practicality of the increased face time. I mean, that is what we hear across the last 20, 25 years of all the research when it comes down to paid professionals being effective is how do I increase the face time with the person that I'm serving, and how do I make sure that I'm up to date and I'm learning the latest and the greatest so that I can implement it in my work. If I'm spending all my time trying to figure out how to justify my actions, once again, it goes back to that software that you put it in, but call me biased. Then, I see it very difficult to really embed these things that we want to do because the system is just not set up to do that. You're set up to prove to the system that you've done your due diligence.
And the same thing applies in the classroom. So we're teaching to the test, and the teachers spend all their time trying to make sure that those scores are up and it's not being suppressed by the mainstream kids that are in your classrooms that have an IEP. And sometimes the kids who have those IEPs, who may be acting out or who may have learning disabilities, just require that additional attention and the knowledge that you're listening to them and you're giving them that face time in order to get that buy-in and to have them commit more. And so I agree with you. I think it's in all systems that we're seeing that.
One of the conversations that I know the group was having, I came in last minute, but I know the group was having a conversation about in what ways are system actors, like all of us, complicit in systems that don't treat children well. And I think one of the issues becomes when we are compliance-driven as opposed to outcomes-driven. So compliance is about the checklist. Sometimes we have to get information, and we're asking these random questions, but it's really about compliance, just getting the information. Or we have systems that are meant to be intended to create individualized systems for kids. So individualized service planning, individualized educational plans. But because of the compliance aspects of all of those things, we end up with people overworked or whatever. They come in with the template IEP or the template service plan, and maybe they change a couple of words. And it's because we're compliance driven too often. If we were focused on the outcomes, then it's almost impossible to start. That's right. It's almost impossible to start from a point of just checking boxes, right? If we're focused on why are we asking these questions? Not just we have to ask the questions to check off the box. Why do we want to find out this information? And then it becomes worthwhile to you to know that maybe I'm going to ask about sexual orientation, gender identity, and I might not get the real answer the first time, but it's worth it for me to go back to the well again and again to ask questions about faith and spirituality, to ask questions about identity, to ask questions about familial relationships and race and ethnicity, and get genuine answers, because I'm not just trying to get the information to check a box. I'm trying to get the information because it's going to help me drive better outcomes for this young person and for their family. And that's a difference.
And I think one response that I hear from people is, well, some of that isn't my business, right? None of that's my business. And my response to that is every bit of that is your business when a kid's under the thumb of the government, right? To know. That's a good transition too to our final question. Sorry, we didn't actually ask this one, I skipped it. Do you ask kids about their disabilities or special needs? For that one real quick.
While people are answering this one, I'm fresh off the Child Welfare League of America conference, and there was a session on CSEC youth, commercially sexually exploited children. And one of the most powerful things, and I've seen this, is it was about identification and asking questions. And the folks who were doing the work said straight up, I've never had a young person identify themselves as a victim of sex trafficking. So you can ask that question, but they were saying, I've worked with hundreds of young people. Nobody's ever said, yes, I am a victim of sex trafficking. So finding ways to get at some of these things, I don't know how many young people would necessarily say, yes, I have special needs and I have a disability. And my disability is. Right? So I think some of that goes back to how we ask those questions, how we get at critical information. And again, why are we asking the questions? Not just to check a box, it's to help with our service planning or whatever it might be, or help with that case. And finding ways to ask questions and get at information in ways that make sense and that are developmentally appropriate, et cetera.
Okay, so before Sixto responds, our last question up there, y'all can answer, is have you seen an example in your work, or have you done something where the young person is centered in the system? And how did that happen? I want to leave on a positive note.
So one of the things I find interesting is when we start taking the labels out, and we just start to bring up, here are the things that I have a struggle with. Here are the things that I really enjoy doing. Here are the things I wish I could do. And it tells such a powerful story. When a young person's clicking kind of the comics that say, I've struggled with, focusing or reading or XYZ, it opens up the door to discover those things. So I just wanted to have just touch on it real quick, because I think, again, we know these things in principle, but I think my next obsession is gonna be, how do we get everything that's already been being generated by the actual, the field for so long into a very practical place? Because I think we have obsessed over what's the research, what's the new study, what's this, what's that. Dude, and ladies, we know that there is the adolescent brain. This is how people develop. We know these are the things that tend to work in these situations, but the question magically becomes, how do we start to actually make these practical things in a way that disrupts the system so much that it replaces what's there? When we decided to go down this route, we said to ourselves, we're not gonna look at improving the case management system, because improving the case management system would be the same journey as improving the flip phone. You would get a flip phone, right? And so we did a lot of work and experiments, and what we came out with is that, we want to build software that enables humans, right, both paid and unpaid, to do three things: heal, develop, and then positions them to thrive. For us, it's how do we make sure we're creating those moments of authentic human interaction that's informed, and that's that healing moment, a new experience that rewires the negative experience that you have had. Developing abilities. We're clear what adolescents are supposed to be learning. They're supposed to be figuring out, do I speak up, do I not, figuring out that expression. So how do we use the actual system to become coaching moments? For us, it's, you're about to have a meeting with your social worker. Have you thought of these things? You get the text message. Oh, I might tell my social worker this. So then that way, you're starting to think and prepare and build that skill. And then the last one, where I'm really excited about, is artificial intelligence to position people to thrive. And just hear me out, because I know this is, a lot of people think differently, feel a lot of different ways about artificial intelligence. For us, using machine learning and AI to figure out where a young person has the highest probability to work, I think we can find more examples like that. So we were doing a partnership with Snagajob, and we went with Microsoft and built a little tiny brain where it's pulling the data in from Snagajob, and it's saying, hey, where are the jobs that fluctuate too much in hours distribution? We know our young people can't work there, because for our young people who don't have a safety net and aged out, $100 short means homeless sometimes, And so making sure those are rolled out. What's the bus line that gets to these jobs, right? Being able to compute that and then say, oh, if the jobs are in this area, the frequency of the bus is that you can probably wake up late and still make it to work on time. Because guess what adolescents do? They wake up late. We're trying to change that behavior, but sometimes it's gonna happen. So I think that there's a huge opportunity for us to figure out how to use these advanced technologies to apply it to what we know to be true already, and try to shift those indicators in the field. And I think we're not having enough of that conversation yet. And I look to see that also in the work of the paid professional side, because how do you get enabled to do your work very much in a different way, that's not just an improvement of the tool that you're using, not just let me get an online directory that can get me to the place faster, but what if that online directory was so smart, I'm only recommending to you the 3 or the 3 to 5 places that is smart enough to match up with this profile, right? So I think we have a lot that we can do with technology if we start to have people risky enough to raise their hand and say, we're willing to go down that route.
Right. Unfortunately, I have had the flag from the time master, although I could listen to these folks all day. If we could give a huge round of applause for